Now, this next session is really key for the promotion of gender equality in the workplace. This is something we keep talking about, this massive gender wage gap, but also gender equality in the workplace. I mean, how many of us wouldn't want more of that in our workplaces? And we're really looking at how technology can help companies reach a more inclusive workplace. And this is a really fascinating question that we'll be tackling in our next session. We have our moderator and the speakers at the ready, but we're just getting the stage set for them right now. And as soon as that's ready, I will invite them onto the stage. Wonderful. I think we're almost there. Shall we get started? Yes. Well, let's invite our moderator, Sansan Lim, and speakers, Fionn Ang, Helen Duce, Ian Lee, and Ulrike Wieduwilt. Apologies if I've messed up that name. Please do come and find me and correct me afterwards. But absolutely, a big round of applause to our next session.
Okay, a very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for staying with us. I'm so delighted and honored to have the privilege of moderating this all-star panel of people with vast experience in the issue of workplace. And I have to say, as a professor of communication and technology, I've done a lot of research on the social impact of technology. And when you think about technology, very often there is a certain sense of anticipation and excitement as to what it can do that's positive. But we also have to think about some of the adverse consequences that may be unconscious to us. And I just want to draw your attention to a very interesting incident with Amazon, where Amazon had actually used an AI algorithm to help it weed out job candidates. And the AI algorithm actually taught itself to reject women automatically because when they tracked it against, previous successful candidates, most of the successful candidates tended to be men. And so without even considering the merits of the women, the AI just filtered out the women. And so this was something that was very alarming when you think about automation, when you think about people putting their heart and soul into applying for a job and not fully appreciating that the machine on the other side isn't seeing any of it. It's just recognizing you by certain tokens, by certain terms. So the whole issue of how we can use technology to navigate a fairer workplace for everyone is something that I think bears consideration, and it's something that this wonderful panel will have very interesting insights on. So I'm going to start by actually inviting each of them to introduce themselves, because I think they'll do a much better job of telling you their life stories than I will. And each of them is going to not just briefly introduce themselves, but also talk about their key concern about the future of work and what they feel has been their main contribution to fostering more inclusive workplaces. So I'll invite Ulrike to kick off, please.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. My name is Ulrike Wieduwilt, originally from Germany. You hear that by the name. And living in Singapore now since almost 3 years, leading Russell Reynolds for Southeast Asia. And we are a company doing executive search and leadership advisory. All in all, I'm 26 years with Russell Reynolds now, but having been in corporate life as well, 15 years with Mars Pet Food, so knowing both sides. Wow. Yeah, very much enjoying Singapore because everybody's asking me how I like it to live here. Before that, I was leading Germany, and before that, I lived in Shanghai as well from 14 to 16. So that's a bit about me. And if you ask me what is my purpose, what is my mission, our mission of Russell Reynolds, is to improve the world, how the world is led, and to be better in leadership, and to look for equitable succession and searches and placements. And my personal target is always bringing as many women as I can up to the C-suite and on boards, and really doing that and not only talking of them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think in terms of the board directorship in Singapore, we have seen the needle move in the last few years. So thank you for the effort. Fionn, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Fionn. I'm the Managing Director for LinkedIn Asia Pac. I run also the Talent and Learning Solutions business in the region. I'm a mother of 3 kids, so the questions I get most is how do you balance and how do you make it work? Over the last, I think, a year and a half or 2 years, a lot of conversation is around Gen AI and how we're helping companies to be aware of the implications and how we can bring that level of insights using our data with that billion members that we have and 665 million companies represented, and to bring that full suite of insight and data so as to help companies to make, to help them actually come up with a workforce strategies that is both inclusive as well as meeting their business needs. So definitely we are in a pivotal time that actually requires a lot of companies and CEOs to be a lot more thoughtful in terms of their workforce strategy. And congratulations, Germany 2-0 last night.
Finally.
We always do.
England won as well. Hi, my name's Helen Duce. I'm the CEO of Include Consulting. I'm also the founder of Lean in Singapore, and I act as an executive consultant to INSEAD's Gender Initiative. You'll tell by my accent that I'm British, but I have lived and worked in Singapore for 12 years. I moved back just a year ago to the UK, not by choice, just to do with passes. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have stayed here. It's a beautiful place to live, and it's a great place to work. When I think about the future of the workplace, my biggest concern, is that we have so much still to do. So there's been a lot of energy and effort put into addressing the gender gap. But I think just yesterday, the World Economic Forum released their 2024 data, and we've still got a gender gap of 135 years globally and 165 years within this region. And it's not shifted or gotten any better. In fact, in many instances, it's getting slightly worse. And this concerns me because there's also seems to be a sort of a moment where there's a lot of fatigue around this work, and in many countries, a lot of backlash. So what we're seeing is diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, becoming this very divisive subject, and it's being politicized in many countries. And that's sort of getting in the way of the work that we still need to do. And just a recent Ipsos study in Singapore showed that 57% of Singapore men think that the work we're doing towards addressing gender inequality is actually now discriminating against them. And perhaps even more shocking is 37% of Singapore women agree with them. So there's this sense that, you know, there is too much push to try and get women into leadership and to try and address the pay gap, and that this is now discriminating, and therefore we should stop the work, when actually in reality there's still so much more to do. So the way that I contribute to that is through my work with Include, is we work with multinational companies to help get more women into leadership using evidence-based solutions that have been proven to work.
That's brilliant, and I just want to share an anecdote that recently I had a friend, be hired by a company as chief of staff, the first woman chief of staff, and I congratulated her, and she said, "Oh, come on, son, I'm just a diversity hire." And I said, "No, you must never say that. You mustn't, discount yourself. You clearly got it fair and square on your qualifications and your abilities." So I totally agree with you on the point about how we've got to make sure that DEI is taken seriously and not, a kind of a showpiece. Ian, would you like to share your perspective?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody over here for being inclusive. I'm one of the few men in this room, and the only one in this panel. Hello everybody, I'm Ian Lee. I'm a Singaporean. I'm very happy to be here. I sit in the executive committee of the Adecco group. one of the largest HR companies, globally. I have been through a lot in my career. So I have been in Adecco for 7 years, but in my previous life, women are actually quite important consumers. I spent 13 years with Procter & Gamble, and 14 years with Whirlpool, making washing machine and refrigerators. And guess what? For washing machine and refrigerators, most of the time, actually, women are the user, okay? So it is very important to understand women. And when I was in P&G, I think my last job, I was the global CFO of the feminine care business. And that was probably the first time that really hits me from a diversity standpoint, that if you have a diverse leadership or diverse workforce, it will actually be good for business. Think about feminine care products. I think most of the female user over here knows about feminine products. But for the men, even if you get a sex change, you will not be using the products ever. And I think I'm probably one of the few men in this room that can understand what's the difference between a plastic applicators and a cardboard applicators for tampons, okay? But the key thing is this: at that point of time, 2002, okay, the whole leadership, you have a president, you have a CFO, you have head of marketing, all men. And that was the time we said, actually, for the good of the business, we need to increase the diversity of the leadership from 20% to 60%, and we did it very deliberately. And that was probably the start. Now, I want to talk about today my concern. I think one of the biggest concerns that as a group and myself we have right now is actually tying to the topic of the discussion, the theme of the 2 days Women Conference, which is tech being a vector of inclusion. However, if you think about this, and we all know that the next phase of I would say evolution is in Gen AI, and I think this is something that we all cannot get away from it. But if you think about Gen AI, STEM is a very, very big part of the pool of talent that goes into the Gen AI's space. However, if we look at the job distribution right now, in non-STEM part, the split between men and women is about 49% women in non-STEM jobs. So that is closer to the world population of around 50-50. However, if you get into the STEM jobs, it falls down to 29%. So there is still a huge disparity in terms of a gap. And you think about that, that is actually something that is very, very scary. Because if you think about the 29%, there are population that has a big part of STEM people like India. But if you take India out, I believe that number has gone down even further. So that is something that from a workforce standpoint, we as a company are very, very concerned about. That's my introduction.
And I'm glad you mentioned generative AI, because when you think about the large language models that we're using today, the language that they've been trained on, the voices are dominated by North American white males. So that actually already biases the large language models that we're using every day.
Yes.
As you can see, we've got such a wealth and diversity of perspectives on the panel. And I wanted to do a deep dive with each of the speakers. And I'll start with you, Fionn, because you're the Managing Director of LinkedIn APAC, and obviously you think a lot about talent strategies. I'd be really curious to know, how do you envision the future of talent strategies evolving with the rapid advancement of AI and other emerging technologies? And what steps do you think companies should take to stay ahead in creating inclusive workspaces in the age of AI?
Yeah. So there's some interesting, pivotal point that we're seeing right now, and we are realizing that more than 80% of employers are actually looking for people with Gen AI skills. So AI skills is becoming more and more pervasive, and they are saying that they need these skills more. And they no longer look for just pure experience. So if it is just based on skills itself, I think there is a chance if companies are a lot more aware on what they can do. So for example, we're very deliberate in terms of the way we design our products to help companies hire equitably. So in a recruiter product itself, we encourage the companies can actually hire based on skills. And when you look for skills, there's immediately an expansion of the pool of talent, rather than just looking at people with a past experience, because perhaps like what Yen said, men tend to do a lot more in a STEM area, and then you kind of exclude people automatically if you just look at past experience. But if you just look at based on skills itself, actually you are able to open up a wider pool of talent. And so what this means is that companies that are a lot more conscious about creating a diverse workforce, an equitable workforce, and knowing what diversity means for them, will actually bring in a different kind of workforce that will contribute to the company. So that's one. The second thing is the companies are also aware that apart from the Gen AI skills, they need to look for people with the soft skills. The soft skills is actually a very important part when technology is becoming more and more pervasive in a workplace. So if we backtrack a little, what does it mean when AI is becoming part of the way that work is being done? So traditionally, when we think about jobs itself, people think about the next job as in the titles. But right now, the way we think about job is about what are the tasks that is required for these jobs to be done. And there are a few jobs, there are parts of these jobs that is repeatable, that actually, that's where the AI would take over. But it also means that it creates a lot more time for people to do a lot more collaboration, brainstorming, problem solving, and that's the kind of soft skills. And interestingly, research shows that women is actually really strong in these areas. And so if companies are a lot more conscious, as they are right now, thinking about Gen AI skills as well as soft skills, I think women has potentially a greater chance to actually show up in this place as well.
That's very encouraging to hear. And in fact, I think in these kinds of exercises to try to see how you need to be more inclusive is where having robust data is really important. So I wanted to invite Ian to share what kinds of specific technological tools and platforms you have used, whether it's data analytics or AI tools. Have you seen any of these tools been helpful in fostering diversity and inclusion in the workplace? And do you have some examples to share with us?
I think I need to basically look at this thing from a couple of angles, okay? From a very senior level, I think, Susan, you just now talk about, we are making progress in the most senior in board, let's say in Singapore, okay? I think we got to start from the top. I think that one is probably not AI related because it's the most senior in the organizations. As a company, we are striving to get our leadership to a slate of 45-55, at least 45% women, 55% men. Now, in order to strive for that, we actually, even go to the market and do a gender-specific search. And Ulrike knew about this. We sometimes said we are only looking for female candidate. Going down, both internally and externally, I think there are a couple of things that we do. I think from a AI perspective, I think we can source candidate specifically like what Fionn is talking about, focusing more on skills. It's actually very, very interesting because AI is, especially Gen A, is getting so smart. But sometimes they are too smart that if you actually turn a male name into a female and switch it, it will yield a different result. So you can see the bias over there. So those are the things that we continuously are feeding, and basing on skill is probably the most important things that we are actually training our system to do from a matching standpoint. Okay, I would basically agree with Fionn in terms of at the end of the day, sometimes internally you have to be very deliberate to strive for the balance, and knowing also there is difference between male candidate and female candidates, because I think there are naturally some difference in terms of genders. Okay, some types of jobs which can be done probably more not really present in the workplace will be favorable more to female, because they also usually are especially in Asia, they are the one that take care of the kids, and all those things. So those are the things that we need to take those bias out, I would say.
Yes, and of course the fact that women still continue to bear the brunt of caregiving is another conversation for another day, but it's also something that as a society we need to address. So that's really interesting. I wanted to then move on to Ulrike and Helen to address the question of the organizational strategies as well as maybe pitfalls, right? So in the organizations that you've been part of or advised, what mistakes have you witnessed when they try to introduce technological HR solutions? And I know I've had to use many painful HR dashboards in my time, but those kinds of solutions. And what do you think some organizations have done right to anticipate the pitfalls? So maybe I'll start with Helen.
Okay, I was hoping you were going to ask Ulrike first, because I'm really interested to learn other people's experiences. So my experiences as a consultant working with multinational companies, so I'm not on the inside to be able to see what's going on. But I guess what I'm most shocked about is the fact that there isn't a lot of HR tech being used. And I think this is one of the things about technology, the sort of perception of how fast things are moving versus the reality are often not aligned. What we see even with very large organizations is that they're still struggling with just the basics around workforce data. So even being able to take a snapshot in time of what does it currently look like beyond gender and nationality, the collecting of diversity information and being able to have a good, accurate picture. There's still a huge way to go there, and especially if it's a global company, because different countries have very different regulations about what you can ask, how you can ask, whether you can hold that data, how you can use that data. And so I'd say because of that as a challenge, it's very difficult to put in solutions if you don't have the data to tell you what the root cause is. So I'd say the number one mistake is not having a really good understanding of what is the problem you're trying to fix and what is the root cause of that problem. So we'll see, so for example, we'll see technology solutions being used. We've already talked about some of these AI tools to screen candidates, or there's different tools that you can use to ensure that your job descriptions aren't gendered. So we'll see tools that are being used around the hiring, but actually when you dig into the data, hiring is not the problem. The problem is the promotion of women within organizations and the attrition rate of losing women because they're not being promoted. but it's easier to fix recruitment. Sorry, I'm simplifying. I'm sure it isn't.
I'm glad it's easier because I hope that LinkedIn makes it easier.
So because recruitment is a one-time thing that often includes a smaller group of people, if you've got like a talent team or a recruitment team, versus when it comes to performance management, there's pretty much every people manager in your organization. Changing, catching bias and putting in solutions there is much trickier than it is, especially at the upfront part of obviously when you're hiring, eventually you've got hiring managers involved, and that's where bias can sneak in. So we see the number one problem is not getting to the root cause and therefore putting solutions in place that are fixing a part of the process that may not be where your problem's coming from. And then the second mistake is just relying on the tools without recognizing we've got to shift people's behavior. So whenever we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion and how we're going to improve a workplace, there's a systemic stuff and there's behavioral stuff, and the two have to go hand in hand. And so a tool that can go a great way to debiasing, but then not bringing the people along with you, means that bias creeps in just at a different stage. And so the two things have to go hand in hand.
That's a fantastic insight, that debiasing isn't just a case of putting in the structures. You've actually got to have that commitment and the buy-in so that people, bring other people on board and you don't have it creep in, as you say, insidiously. Ulrike, what's your perspective?
Yeah, and just referring, Helen, to you in a short comment on that, what we can see, the big MNC company, some companies like Adecco, going a lot more now to a system where they're looking at internal and external candidates. We are even doing a kind of assessment, leadership potential assessment for everybody who's brought in. So, and that can be for internal candidates and external candidates as well. And more people get used to that they're in this process. But good is they can show up internal candidates being female, and they do not have always the feeling, oh, it's again somebody from external, why I'm doing all this here. Coming back to your question, what we are seeing is, there's three things. One thing is intention versus impact. Many companies are putting in a lot of technology changes and adoption of technology like AI for hiring, and they have the good purpose, efficiency, and so on in mind. But very often you have this, they call it the German paradox. That means the more and more you're efficient, the easier it is to use something, the more and more it means you're using these resources and you produce more and more consumption. A good example for this is emails. I mean, in former times we were very careful what we were writing because, it's difficult to change it. Now with the emails, we are writing for everything in email. So that means people are swarmed with emails, and all this kind of technology advantage getting lost because, on the burden of employees, they do not know how to manage the emails anymore. So, and that is the same. The easier it is with the AI to go on this whole hiring thing, the more it can be increasing the consumption of how you're using that. That is one thing. The other thing, what we can see is you have a platform, it's called Wieduwilt. And when you go on that one, it's all by AI and video taking, and there is nobody in there when you're doing, the selection, only at the end. The thing is, what is lacking is the human factor. And yes, you can do everything with AI, the interviews and so on. But we have seen that during COVID, nothing is more valuable than sitting next to somebody and have the feeling how he, she is reacting. And I love very much, Ian, when I read your comment on LinkedIn on the Labor Day. We should never forget when we have the Labor Day, what it means that human people are in a world and that they're working there and bringing each other together. So if you do that all by AI, I have seen so often, you do not get this culture fit. And I think that is, we are doing a lot for the C-suite, but that is the most important thing, is finding out what is the right culture fit. And very often we had that saying, you're hiring for diversity and you're firing for not fitting in. So that's not really what we want to see, because we are really focusing, bringing people in who are growing and who will be promoted and becoming CEO. But when you always have a kind of AI for selecting, let's see the younger ones, then you have a succession profile, what you would like to hire. And we see that in the big professional companies for strategy. I do not want to name one here, but they all have the same breed of people. And then they're hiring us in the end to find somebody for their partners being a bit different. Yeah, but saying it's self-fulfilling prophecy, because you only get the A ratings and having this and that, and then you hire them. And then you wonder that they're all a bit the kind of same breed and not being creative. That's the same when you look at innovation today and marketing, how you get the great innovator. You're losing them in startups because they're not going in the big companies anymore. They have the feeling they have no place there. And the other thing is it's self-selection. You do not get them out. And I think that is the biggest problem.
Can I just add to that? Because I think that's the challenge as well, is the diversity piece is where everybody's focused, but that without inclusion is where you end up with, we're bringing in diversity. All the research that shows the impact of diversity is the impact of diversity of thought. And if you can't include that diversity in decision-making, in the innovation process, then I always liken it to trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. You're pouring in water and it's just coming straight out the bottom. So the inclusion piece is so essential. Because we always talk to our clients about it's not about cultural fit, it's about cultural add. But you can only have the cultural add if you have an intentional strategy around inclusion. Otherwise, you get that come in because you're different, and then you leave because you're different.
No, those are really fantastic insights that, link the two really rich perspectives that you shared. And I particularly like what you said about the human touch, because I think COVID was a fantastic learning period, because I had students graduate into COVID, going to the workplace where they were simply working from home. They barely understood the corporate culture. They didn't understand the organizational norms, and they felt very much the poorer for it. So it's really important to be very intentional about creating that culture of learning, peer-to-peer instruction sharing, and so on. So we've covered quite a lot of ground, and I do want to give the panelists a closing question that will help them to, maybe give us some good takeaways. And I want to refer to the saying, which is culture eats technology, that, we're talking a lot about tech, but ultimately, as we have identified, culture, values are still really important. So even in the face of all of these technological upheavals, what is one thing you would like to see change in corporate culture that will make companies more open, not just to innovation, but also to diversity and inclusion?
If I may start, it's really making a diversity in place and not diversity in play. I still see many people speaking of diversity. I believe strongly in diversity in thinking. So, because when you look at some of the leaders of the big companies, some sport goods companies we know well, and other ones, when they're only coming from the analytical side and not from the diversity side, and from hiring people having an opinion. So the most important thing is when you're hiring, having people who are not following you, that you're on the safe side. No, you need people, especially on the high level, who have a different opinion, who might dare to say, Ian, I'm not sure if this is right. Maybe we look at an alternative. So otherwise, you're not getting better with your companies. And I'm hugely convinced of that we have to find the best leaders, because what I see more and more with the technology, that we have a big lack of leadership. How you lead and how you include people and how you really give them the feeling it's a great place to work here. So that's the reason so many people are moving out, and attrition is a topic.
Sending the right signals from the top. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, first off, a few things come to mind. I think it's unfortunate, like even in the World Economic Forum research in collaboration with LinkedIn shows that actually the number of women leadership representation is actually declining in 2024 research, kind of reversing the trend that we saw in 2022. So it's disappointing. And I think it's a great reminder for every companies to kind of really think about whether they think about diversity as something, as a business strategy, and how important it is. As what Helen said, if diversity for the sake of diversity, it feels like a tokenism. But diversity with the intention of really having that inclusivity and having that diversity of thoughts, I think it brings about a greater diverse thoughts that will help the business bring to the next level. And I believe that when a company is intentional, you can see in their actions. In their actions, in terms of the way they hire, in the way they promote, in the way that they empower and train and invest. It's almost something very purposeful, because we know that women is not lacking in competence, but very often they're lacking in confidence. And so if a company is intentional about it, what kind of training and access do they provide for the women so that they help women grow in their career as well? And likewise, you know, be it in the media, be it in companies' role, and as well as individuals. I mean, it's important for women to really kind of rise up as well, to really understand what is the area that I need to work on, and that I work on it and learn to speak up and learn to raise your hand and say that I'm interested in the next job. And I think all of the things that we talk about in terms of skills, in terms of making sure that your company is aware of your intention to grow in your career, these are all important. Role models is important. So there's so many that companies can do to help create a diverse workforce.
Exactly, and I think as you say, you know, deliberate intent and purpose is so vital, and it's even the little things, making sure that the women aren't always the ones doing the office housework, like organizing the farewell parties, the promotion gifts, and so on. Helen.
Yes, I want to build on that. If there's one thing that I would like to see is organizations continuing to focus on addressing the inequality, especially around leadership, women in leadership, because I feel if we fix the women in leadership, the rest will trickle down. And actually McKinsey work shows that once it's fixed, it's fixed. So once you fix it at the top, then it becomes fixed throughout. And how they approach that, what I think I would like to see is, it's sort of, I agree and disagree with what you just said. It's moving away from thinking about we need to fix the women, so we need to fix the system. And so often what we see is that there are programs that organizations do which are focused on, we're going to fix the women, but we're not going to talk to the rest of the organization about what needs to shift. And so what we'll see is, you know, training courses or programs for women which are sort of unintentionally suggest the problem is the women's problem, and if only women had greater skills, then maybe they'd need to get ahead. Women do need to change the way they navigate the workplace. We know that women experience the workplace in a very different way. The evidence shows quite clearly that there's lots of biases against us. And we've internalized some of those, which is what you're talking about, which is where I agree. So I think our women in leadership programs need to focus on how do we help women understand how they've internalized these biases, and therefore how they can mitigate those as they navigate their careers, speaking up, asking for the promotion, amplifying their work, all this good thing, as opposed to suggesting that they lack some sort of leadership skills. It's more the internal work that needs to be done, while at the same time helping the rest of the organization. And often when we're talking about the rest of the organization, it's men who don't understand the lived experience that we're having, that they understand that, yes, this person is less likely than your male colleague to put their hand up for that promotion. And so you need to go ask. So it's not just about we need to change, the system needs to change, and men need to understand that they need to operate in a different way if they want to get more of us into leadership. So yes, we should make our voices heard, but we should also make space for our voices to be heard. Yes, we should put our hands up for promotion, but we should also be invited to be promoted. So it's shifting both sides of the system.
So I think there's a particular leader, the global CEO of Chanel, who lives by the mantra, lift as you climb. And I think that really represents what you just said. So Ian, we are so inclusive and so generous that you have the privilege of the last word today.
Okay, my last word is when you talk about the culture of the organization, continuous learning and continuous skill upgrades will be very, very important overall. But one thing that I think people needs to be conscious is in the workforce, we found that there are actually higher dropouts in women versus men, okay, along the way. Now, the thing is this, if you are continuously learning because of the changes that we are facing in the world right now, which is, changing technologies and all those things, we have to make sure that the continuous learning also applies to those women that drops out, and we have to bring them back into the organization at a certain point of time, which means that how you bring them into rescaling them into the new world and all those things. I think those are the cultural changes that is critical that we need to see in the future for organizations.
So some really useful insights there that we can all take away and run with. So please join me in thanking our really illustrious and illuminating panel.